So as I was saying, this is so exciting. Many adventures await for all of us. I'm just very excited to see everybody logging in and seeing so many old friends and new friends, and I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful few days. Before we delve into the subject at hand, a few points of order to help make the online event run smoothly. As we have already seen, there are some issues. Please put your name and affiliation in the chat for the record, and also so that friends here can keep track of who is online and who isn't. Keep your mic on mute unless you are actually speaking, and try to keep your camera on so that we can see everyone's lovely faces. We are grateful to our institutional member, Chateau de Versailles, for providing the platform for the meeting. And although it is basically like all other video conferencing platforms, it is slightly different from Zoom and Teams, which most of us use more regularly. So if you have any questions, please send a direct message to Caroline or Cecilia or Nicoletta. You can find their names in the list of users at the side of the screen, and they will be able to help you. And I'd also, before we start, I want to thank, and for this will be the first time and they will be thanked many times over the next few days, the team who have worked so hard to make this event happen. It's been led by the DEMHIST board members, Caroline Guillard and Cecilia Casa de Santos and Milja Stijovic, and been supported by the DEMHIST conference working group and board members. It's been an amazing experience and overwhelming to see the exuberance and intensity of contributions from everyone involved in creating this event, and also the eagerness of participants and presenters to take part. So thank you, everybody. Over the next 3 days, we will explore the role of historic house museums in shaping and inspiring communities through the themes of inspire, interpret, and impact. House museums connect the past and present and guide us towards a more inclusive and sustainable future. They hold a unique position as bridges between the past and present. I see I'm kind of falling out the screen. Embodying local histories and cultural narratives within their walls. Beyond preserving artifacts and stories, these institutions play a crucial role in connecting with and serving their communities in meaningful ways. At the heart of this connection is the House Museum's ability to anchor community identity. By preserving and showcasing local heritage, historic house museums provide residents with a tangible link to their roots, fostering a sense of pride and continuity. This connection is often strengthened through community involvement in preservation efforts, historical research, and cultural programming. Each day of this conference, we will hear from our community, historical house professionals, as we present each other's case studies and research papers or virtual tours of our museums. We will have time to ask questions and discuss related topics. In addition, there will be quizzes, treasure hunts, and word clouds to keep us all on our toes as we sit in front of our computer screens. One second, that's me, and here we go. I want to thank you all for registering for this event. The response has been amazing. As you can see in this world map, we really are a global institution with representation from across the world. Obviously, we would like to increase some of the dark blue areas below the equator, but it's happening and we are all very much working towards this. We are mainly so who's taking part in this online event? We are mainly active museum professionals, which is hardly surprising, but we are joined by retirees as well as students. And so please make this event an occasion to make connections for the future as well. Although this is an ICOM DEMHIST event, we were determined to be open to all who wish to join us. So as you can see here, we will be joined by members from other ICOM international and national committees. In fact, there are registrations from 21 other ICOM committees and affiliated organizations, not to mention all our new unaffiliated friends. We hope you won't be unaffiliated for long and that you will reach out to us to learn about joining ICOM and DEMHIST. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we will be using various interactive programs over the next few days. This isn't only to stop you falling asleep, it's also a way for us to gather points of discussion and interest to see the range of views amongst us all. We will start today after the presentations with our first word cloud, so stay around until the end, please, to take part in that. Are there any questions before we proceed? Everything's clear? Fantastic. Okay, so this is what awaits us today. We're going to, in a moment, turn to John Ornstein, our keynote speaker, for presentation and discussion, after which we will have a little break. And then we will go to our presentations and virtual tours of all connected to our first word of the week, Inspire. I think we can now open the keynote session. Caroline, would you like to take back control?
We can, yeah.
Okay, so I'm very pleased to introduce John Ornstein, who today holds the position of Director of Culture and Engagement at National Trust UK. He has held positions on the Advisory Board of Heritage Futures. He was Director of Museums at the Arts Council England and was formerly Head of National Programmes at the British Museum. He is a board member of the Museums Association, the International Council of Museums UK, the Migration Museum and London Museums Group. So I think that places him in a fantastic position to be our keynote speaker today. His current post includes responsibility for leading the National Trust's visitor experience and caring for and making as relevant and accessible as possible its historic sites across the UK. I'm happy to have John give his presentation, after which we will have time for Q&A and a discussion. So please put your questions in the chat or just write, I have a question, so we will know to call on you. John, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Although given you're joining from all over the world, perhaps I should say good afternoon, good morning, good midday, and good night. I don't know, but anyway, it's lovely to be with you and lovely to see so many people joining from different parts of the world. So just in front of me, from Mexico and Brazil and Belgium, just as examples, and from many other nations. So thank you very much for the opportunity to join you and speak. As Timna said, my responsibility is to care for the historic houses looked after by the National Trust in the UK. And I will talk a little bit about that. I will set the context by talking about the organisation and then go on to speak about some of the things, some of the challenges we have and some of the things that we're thinking about in terms of care for those historic houses, and more importantly, how they are useful and helpful to people today. As Timna has already said, I plan to speak quite informally for, I'm not quite sure how long, perhaps 20 minutes or so. We'll see how long the slides take, but my hope very much is that we will then have a conversation. So if anything that I say provokes a question for you, please put it in the chat. Or if there are other things that you'd like to say about historic houses, do start the conversation as I'm talking. I'm sure you're I haven't worked with you as an organization before, but I'm sure you're a voluble, excited, interested, engaged audience. So it'd be lovely to have that sort of conversation. So I don't know how much you know about the organization that I work for, so let me tell you a little bit about us just to get started. So we were established about 130 years ago by an act of Parliament in the UK, and the National Trust now cares for something like 30,000 buildings, about 250,000 hectares of land, about 800 miles of the coastline, and amongst that, about 200 to 300 significant historic houses, and they vary enormously. And there are pictures of just 3 of them here. So some of them are grand historic houses, like Hardwick Hall, belong to Bess of Hardwick, a contemporary of Elizabeth I. Others are Archbishop's Palace, like the one at Knowle on the right-hand side of the screen. But others are much more domestic. So Mr. Straw's house, which is a perfectly preserved 1920s interior, belonging to a family who kept the house in the same condition for the 60 years that they owned it. So a huge variety of houses. Most of them came to the National Trust through legislation, through a government act. And the government set up a scheme working with the National Trust where owners of historic houses could gift those houses and their estates sometimes to the nation in place of taxes, death duties. As a result of that, at a time when many historic houses in the UK were unsustainable, unprofitable to care for, many of those families chose to give one or more of their houses or estates to the nation through the National Trust. As a result of that, as I say, we have this incredible historic collection of historic houses, gardens, parklands, and estates. And they're visited by some 25 million people a year. The key mechanism for supporting the charity, and we are a charity independent of government, the key mechanism for supporting us is a membership scheme. So people pay an annual subscription to visit National Trust properties, any trust properties they want to across the country. And we have more than 5 million people in the UK who choose to be members of the National Trust. And that, on top of all of the other things we do, sustains these historic places into the future. Because we care for so many historic houses, I think within the UK, in any case, and perhaps more widely, the National Trust has been able to be part of the history, not just of caring for historic houses, but of thinking about how to present them and how to care for them. So, for example, in terms of care, the National Trust Manual of Housekeeping that we have published in more than one version is used in many parts of the world. In terms of how we presented historic houses, similarly, some of the changes that we've made, some of the new innovations that we've made in terms of care for historic houses, I think have been influential, certainly in the UK, and perhaps more widely in other parts of the world. Over the last 20 or 30 or 40 years, it would be fair to say that on the whole, we have made historic houses more and more accessible over time, and that we have that we've been able to care for them, I think, to a higher and higher standard. So just to take some examples, through the 1980s and 1990s, it became more and more popular not just to present one story in the historic house of the family, but to present a wider story of the estate, of the other people who worked on the estate, of servants and so on. So that's one example, that the presentation of the historic house, an obvious example of how it's changed over time. Similarly, over the last perhaps 20 years, the Trust has worked to make historic houses more accessible, particularly to families. So we called this taking down the ropes, and we had a chairman of the National Trust who used to tell us to, before I joined the organisation, to take down ropes and to light the fires, i.e. to bring the houses to life, to make them interesting and accessible to people. And as a result of that, and the changes we made in our houses and the changes we made outside our houses, particularly for our family audience, is that was the crucial element in becoming more accessible, and actually in building a financial model through membership and those 5.5 million members that makes us sustainable as an organisation. But having done all of that, having made all of those changes over time, what I would say as we start to think about the theme of this conference, about houses and their communities, or even communities and their houses, that nearly all of our work in the past has been about the mode of presentation of houses, so how to care for them and then how to present them to the public. The key shift that is beginning to happen for us, and I know for you looking at the other papers in this conference, is how we change our relationship with our audiences and our communities, moving away from presenting to something that is far more conversational, and actually to something that is about sharing authority in, around those houses. One other important piece of context to mention for us is that houses are not uncontroversial. In fact, they are the opposite. They are very controversial. And because the National Trust is a national organisation with many million members, it also attracts a lot of attention from the media, from the press. To give you one example, some 3 or 4 years ago, my team published a report on the links between National Trust sites and historic slavery and colonialism. That created a huge national conversation, actually, many articles in the press in this country and some in other parts of the world, and the attention of all sorts of people, from our Prime Minister to you know, archbishops and other significant people, and they all had something to say about why you know, whether it was appropriate for the National Trust to talk about histories of slavery and colonialism. And for some people, this was an attack, seen as an attack on the former owners of those houses. Equally, just in the last 2 or 3 months, the National Trust has presented a very creative, contemporary exhibition in one of our houses, a place called Tinsfield in the west of England. And even that attracted quite a lot of controversy and debate in the media, with some people feeling it was inappropriate and didn't add anything to the house, and so on and so on. And my point here, I suppose, is, first of all, actually we should be pleased. We should all be pleased. People care about historic houses and how they're presented and the future of historic houses. But more than that, Timna has already mentioned in her introduction the relationship between historic houses and community and identities. And I suppose that's what I've seen very clearly over the last few years, that the historic house is associated, particularly in this country, with a particular idea, a particular image of the nation and the nation in the past. And for some people to change that, to present houses differently, to have different conversations, to involve more people in presenting the houses and using the houses, can feel like a challenge to that sense, not just of local identity, but of national identity. So I don't know whether that's a common experience for others, and whether others have the same sorts of challenges around those big national issues of identity. I know, for example, that in the US that has certainly been the case. So let me take us to a specific historic house. This is called Clarendon. It's in a part of England called Surrey, which is not very an affluent part of England on the whole, which is not very far from London. And back in 2015, so almost 10 years ago now, there was a catastrophic fire at Clarendon, caused by an electrical fault. And as you can see from this one image, it largely destroyed the interior of the house and largely destroyed the collections. That in itself, of course, is a tragedy, but at the same time, I think it has provoked us to think much harder about the future of our historic houses, about what to do with Clarendon in terms of its restoration, but even more importantly, about what the future of all of these 200 or more historic houses is across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And as I've already mentioned, the key shift that we're starting to make is to think less about the history of those houses, less about the conservation of them, less about the presentation. All of those things, of course, are important, but more about what their use is today, who needs them, and why they're needed, what value they have in people's lives. And particularly, our concern is that of those many historic houses in our care, it feels to us that that there is a danger in presenting them just as museums. Rather, they need to be places, what we call living cultural resources, so places that are used and enjoyed and have real value in people's lives today. If that isn't the case, then essentially we are just presenting some particular images of life in the past that I fear will become less and less relevant to many of our users. Our challenge, that is our challenge, but our opportunity is to work with audiences and communities to reimagine these places and to think about what they might be in the future. So I'll come back to Clarendon at the end of my presentation to talk a little bit about it, but I wanted to present it as a conundrum and one that has got us thinking very hard about historic houses. But one of the things that I might say to be just a little bit challenging at this point is that my feeling increasingly is that in the UK, as we have professionalized our work over the last decades, as we've got better and better at caring for our historic houses, as the standards of conservation and care that we apply become closer and closer to those of museums, I think that could be good, but I think there is a danger there as well, that some of the processes and ways of thinking of museums are not always helpful for historic houses. And these, of course, are the collections, the objects in them are only one facet of the places themselves, and they themselves, as I've said, I think are places that most importantly need to be peopled. I think it is the use and the new stories of new people in these places that makes them relevant and really brings value. So what I want to do is just talk a little bit about some of the ways of thinking that we have about our historic houses, some of the principles that we're applying. I'm going to give 2 or 3 examples, and then, as I say, I'll come back to Clarendon, and then we will open up for a conversation if I have provoked any questions for you. So these 6 points on the screen on the right-hand side are just the principles that we've applied to, as we've thought in recent years about our historic houses as a whole, what the connections are across them, what the differences are across them, and overall, as I say, how they can be living and relevant and changing and evolving and a part in people's lives today, and more than the museum and more than the good day out. So the 6. Let me talk through these 6 principles. The first is a very obvious one, that they are inspired by the past, because although I'm deeply interested in what the uses of houses are today and what people want from them, I am confident that there is enough in the past of those houses to inspire that current use and, of course, future uses. So an obvious starting point as an organisation that looks after heritage buildings is that all of them are inspired by the past. And we think there are already many examples I could give you across the National Trust and beyond of how the history of a place in the past, whether it is a single point of inspiration, a single person, or whether it's much broader themes, inspires a contemporary use and perhaps challenges us to think a bit differently about the present day. So that's the first principle. The second is people-led and very pertinent, of course, to the theme of this conference over the next 3 days. So our determination for our houses, but beyond that, for all of our historic buildings, for our gardens, for our landscapes, is that the starting point is people and people's needs and people's own stories, and everybody, of course, we're all in the end self-centered, and everybody, of course, starts with themselves. So starting with what people need and also their own stories, I think, is the only way, as far as I can see, to think about historic houses and more broadly about heritage today. We as a National Trust are on the point of launching a new strategy for the next 10 years, which will start in January. And the key shift in that strategy is away from thinking first and foremost about the heritage or the nature in our care, to thinking more about people and population and where people live and what it is that people need. So communities and their historic houses. The third is one that has particularly inspired us, used and useful. So I will talk about some different sort of categories of houses in a moment, but we are very clear that there's an important shift that is happening now, has happened in other historic houses and is relevant to our houses, which is, as I've said, not just how they're presented, not even only the stories and a more diverse set of stories that might be told in them, but actually is about how they are actively used and actively useful in people's lives. So how they're platforms for the functions that people want from them. That's used and useful. Connected. All of our houses, I mean, the title of this conference around historic houses and their communities pushes us to realize that historic houses can't operate in isolation. But it has been easy for us as a large organization caring for hundreds of places, spending hundreds of millions of pounds every year in doing that. It's easy for us not to look out, but to look in within the organization. And it's easy for our historic houses to operate as independent heritage places, rather than seeing themselves as fully part of a local community, a local landscape, a local urban landscape, a local countryside, a local set of other heritage and cultural and natural environment organizations. So if I described one key shift in our strategy being moving towards what people need, away from just valuing the asset, the other shift is that our future strategy will be all about working with other people, and that's nationally as an organization, internationally in terms of this sort of conversation, but also locally in terms of connections to local communities. The fifth principle that we apply is distinct and differentiated, and by this we mean, and this may be less relevant for some of you, but for us we care for more than 200 houses, and so it's very easy to apply the same standards to those, or almost to be the supermarket of historic houses, where we present all of our houses in a similar mode. Obviously, each one of these houses is distinctly different in terms of its history. It's also distinctly different in terms of its communities, its functions, its connections and relationships. So one of the big challenges for us is to think about how we differentiate much more clearly between our houses. Even that is quite a challenge for us, and that's because we are such a big organization and such a big brand. People have particular expectations when they come to visit a National Trust house. So they expect it to be well presented and clean. They expect it to have some limited interpretation, but not too much. They expect every house to have a full set of rooms, every house to have bedrooms as well as living rooms and dining rooms and so on. So there's a particular set of expectations, and as we start to do very different things with some houses, we're actually finding that quite challenging. So to give you a specific example, over the last couple of years, we presented one of our houses, somewhere called Sudbury, as a children's country house, as a country house for children. So I would argue that nearly all of our country houses are presented for adults in the end, with some support, some engagement for children. A significant part of our audience is children, and so we've turned that on its head at one place, and we've said that the main audience for this historic house is children, but of course adults are welcome to visit too. It seems to me that is so that is a house that is very engaging, very active, where children dance, where children play, where children explore. That seems to me a fairly uncontroversial thing to do, but actually to turn a historic Jacobean house into what some people see as a playground, although of course it's much more than a playground, has attracted some interest and some criticism. But nevertheless, that idea that all of these houses are distinct and differentiated, I think is very important. And then the last one, sort of increasingly important, that all of our houses are resilient and sustainable. And we mean that in at least two senses, probably more, but at least two. So sustainable economically, because we have to be a viable organization in order to care for these places and make them accessible and have them used, but also of course sustainable environmentally. So I'm speaking today from a house that is fairly old. It's about 400 years old, 17th century, and I know as the owner of a very small historic house, the challenges in terms of changing climates. So when your roof is made of straw, as my roof is made of, then you learn the impact of increased rainfall, for example. And we see many examples of that across the National Trust. Even today, I saw a report on the historic collections in one of our houses in London, an important collection of musical instruments which are being damaged by the changing climate at the moment. And we see that in many of our houses with paintings that are more likely to flake, temperatures that are more likely to rise and fall quickly, and therefore more likely to have damp and conditions of mold and so on and so on. So that sort of sustainability, of course, is incredibly important. So those are the principles we're applying across all of our places, and we're finding that very helpful, just to be able to say to our many teams in many different parts of the country, think about these things when you're thinking about historic houses. Just to say thank you to Carl, because I think Carl has either, I haven't got time to read it, but posted a comment or made a question. So I mentioned that just to encourage anybody else. So if you have any other thoughts or questions, do get them coming in a few moments' time. So those are the principles that we apply, but we're also thinking about the different modes across our houses, across this great big collection of historic houses. So just to give you 3 or 4 examples of how we're thinking differently about different sorts of houses. The first is what we're calling discovery houses. And actually, this is the most traditional model of houses, in that what we want to do is we want to present them better. We want to tell better histories, better stories. We want to tell more diverse stories and more open stories. We want to conserve them very well. But in the end, what we're doing here is we're inviting people to come and discover the houses, discover their history, discover their stories. Excuse me. Think about the relationship between their own histories and stories in these places. So I would argue that is the most traditional mode of presentation. It doesn't mean it's boring or unexciting. So to take the example of the house in front of you, this is a 17th century house called Durham Park in the west of England. And it's the home of somebody called William Blathwaite, who was a very important early colonial administrator, who helped from Britain's perspective to begin to define some of the different rules and ways of working for the early colonies. So a set of histories here that is interesting, but also challenging globally. So at Durham Park, we've been able to restore the interior of the house as well as some of the gardens. We've been able to work with a more diverse group of people, academics, local people, school children, all sorts of people in telling stories. And we've represented them in ways that are much more engaging and interesting and open than we have done before. And when I say open, if you'd been to this house 10 years ago, you would have had very little idea of the fact that the materials in the house were from the colonies, that the mahogany in the staircase and in the paneling was from the colonies, and so on. That the wealth that contributed to the house was from the colonies as well. So to be much more open about the full history of those houses, including the challenging history of the houses, is important. And these are but nevertheless, what we're doing here, as I say, is we're preserving and we're presenting in a relatively traditional form. And these are actually some of the historically most significant of our houses, and they're the houses that we've judged that they have a real value as they are, as an intact ensemble, as a presentation of a particular time in history, with a relevant and important set of histories. That doesn't mean that we won't ever challenge that or do different things or do creative things. But these are houses that are in a fairly traditional mould. And they include places like Chartwell, the home of Prime Minister Winston Churchill. They include two of the houses I showed in an early slide, Hardwick Hall, the home of Bess of Hardwick, and Knowle, which is an Archbishop's Palace. And so some of the most significant, important houses are presented, and we think we should carry on presenting in this relatively traditional way, but do it at a high quality. There are also some of our houses that we think have much more impact, not at the place itself, but beyond the place in terms of how they can inspire. So inspiration is one of the key themes that we're applying to our houses. So some of these houses are ones, quite often they're ones that are houses of individual people at a much more domestic scale. They're houses that in any case can't have tens or hundreds of thousands of visitors through them. But where the themes and the stories and so on are so interesting that what we want to do is amplify them digitally, amplify them through conversation, amplify them through debates, through new creative projects and so on. And we think that in all of that, in the conversation rather than presentation, it comes the main value of these houses. So just to take a couple of examples here, on the left is a house in a part of London called Wandsworth, 575 Wandsworth Road, and it was owned by a Kenyan civil servant and artist from the 1950s onwards, and he created a sort of wonderful treasure house within the house, and the house is full. It's from outside it looks like an ordinary house. Inside it's full of detailed woodwork and fretwork and interesting ceramics and all sorts of things. So it's a sort of it's a creative treasure chest, and we've been able to use that we host digital conversations there, and pick up interesting themes and talk about creativity and difference and identity and all sorts of things. We work with local schools and local community organizations, and we take some of the themes of the house out into the community. So it's part of a big digital virtual conversation, but it's also useful in its local community. Within the house itself, actually, we can only have 6 visitors at one time. It's a tiny, tiny audience. So actually, its work beyond its walls is much more important. And just one other example of this, 20 Forthling Road. So this is the childhood home of one of the Beatles, Paul McCartney. And this is a place that is actually quite well visited, quite well used. Thousands of people go there every year, even though it's a very small, very ordinary domestic house. But of course, its position as the childhood home of, put somebody at the centre of one of the greatest bands in history is more important than the place itself. So we've been able to use it as a place to work with young people, to work with emerging artists, to create new work, and particularly to work in Liverpool with a diverse audience of young artists, young creative people and musicians, and inspire them about the future. So again, I would argue that the inspiration, the stories, the connections are more important than the thing itself, which actually in the end is a relatively ordinary suburban house in Liverpool. And then two more sort of categories of houses before I start to come to a close, and hopefully we have a conversation. And I talked about that principle of houses being used and useful, and it's one that particularly excites me. What people need from historic houses are different things that they can use them for. And I think there are many of our places, you know, perhaps 100, perhaps more, that are most important, that have significance in themselves, but and don't take this the wrong way, but I would describe them as average mansion houses. So they are beautiful places with a beautiful garden, with a relatively interesting story of a wealthy family that lived there. But there are many houses like that in the UK. So you have to start to think, is there more that we can do in these places than preserve them? And it certainly is there more that we can do than tell the stories of a very sort of tiny part of society through those houses. And in some parts of the country, those historic houses are close to communities that have very real needs and challenging needs. And this is an example. This is a place called Dinefa in Wales, yeah, it's a historic house where the team that work there are working very, very actively with the community and thinking about what that house can be as a platform for the local community, for their own creativity, for their own events, for their play, for their coming together, etc., etc. So across many of our houses, we're going through a process of talking to local people about what it is that they need, and that doesn't those houses still aren't the same as other buildings, that are not historic, but we use the stories, the histories of the places to inspire those conversations, to engage people. But in the end, what we're particularly interested in is what those local people need. And that's everything from employment to, as I say, maybe functions that are not always being provided by local government anymore. So perhaps it is spaces to gather that are safe, places that are for communities to use for play that are also safe, libraries where there are not libraries, and so on and so on. And one of the great pleasures of my working life is that every now and then I get an email or a letter from somebody in the local community close to this house, Dinefa, and they are absolutely extraordinary because they talk about the impact of that place in the local community. One of the letters said something like, Dinefa was once a black mark for the local community, a place we didn't go, and it's now a place that we love. And that transformation, I think, is incredibly significant, and of course, particularly in terms of our theme of historic houses and their communities, or rather, communities and their historic houses. And then just the last theme sort of takes us away from our historic houses, doesn't it? And to that starting point of other people's homes, other people's houses. And we are in this fortunate position of working across the country and working with millions of people as an audience. So increasingly, and particularly in our new strategy, we're thinking about how we can bring nature and beauty and history to people in their own homes and in their own communities, and how we can make a difference in their own houses, whether historic or not historic. So just to take one example of that, this is a lovely project that we did last year in Manchester, a city in the north of England, where we worked with people in some deprived parts of Manchester and help them to grow their own natural environment, their own green balconies. And we held competitions, and we supported people, and we had people supplying plants and all that sort of thing to bring nature and beauty to people where they live. And that's something we're thinking about in terms of history and heritage as well. So it's an obvious point, but I think that movement from our own houses and our care to what people need actually in their own homes, and to nature, beauty and history where they live, is a really important one. So to close, I just wanted to come back to Clarendon and talk a little bit about what Clarendon has inspired and what the future of Clarendon will be. And we perhaps as context to this, to say that 30 years ago, another house in the care of the National Trust burnt down, or partly burnt down. It's called Up Ark, and it's in the south of England. And the trust at the time, or a few in the following years, entirely restored that house and restored it to what it used to be, and that's a good thing. But this time, with this particular historic house at Clarendon, we've taken a very different decision, and we've decided that to recreate the house would be largely meaningless. We would be building, in effect, a modern replica of a historic house. So we've decided instead to make sure that the historic fabric that remains is well preserved, to put a roof on it, although it won't be a roof anything like the traditional one. It will be a contemporary one, to allow people up to that roof so that they can view the house and view the historic landscape, to put in walkways so that people can see what will continue to be the damaged, fire burnt interior of the house, and instead of restoring it, to use it as a new space for the local community, a place that is creative, a place that where the local community can gather, a place where we can display new creative work, a place that will continue to be about the skills and the stories of people in the past, and demonstrating those and talking about those, but even more will be about new stories, new creativity, new histories being written in the place. And I wanted to finish on that example, because I think that sort of very challenging example where we've had to rethink an important historic house, a conservation project that will cost many tens of millions of pounds. But it seems to me that doing something that is forward thinking and creative and open and responds to communities in that place is an important signal of what we might be as an organization, how we might think differently about historic houses, but particularly how we might think differently about what people and what communities need from those historic houses. So I hope that was helpful, and I've just run through at a high level who we are as an organization, what it is that we do, how we think about our historic houses and some of the principles that we apply, and then what that starts to mean in practice. I realize that was at a high level, and many of you are working in single historic houses or small groups of historic houses, so it may have seemed a little bit distant when I'm talking about hundreds of historic houses in one go, but I hope that was helpful anyway. So what we'd like to do now, Timna, I think, is open up for any conversation. And I know there've been one or two comments, so I don't know if there's anything in those, or whether you'd like people just to come off mute and ask questions, or how to do it.
Well, I think first of all, I want to say thank you. I found it very interesting listening to you. I grew up in London, and I grew up visiting National Trust houses when I was a child. And I remember going mainly to the larger estates and parks. The ones that were close to my house, like Kenwood House, was somewhere that we would go and we would enjoy the park, and we would go and have tea or listen to concerts in the summer. And then maybe at the weekend we'd go and do a long trip out of London to go and visit some of the larger estates. And one of the things that really came clear to me in what you're talking is the smaller houses, the houses that are within the cities, the places that are really part of a local community, as opposed to the estates, where when you talk about what is their community, it becomes a much more complex issue. So I think this is also something we will discuss over the next few days, and I would like to go to some of the questions in the chat. I don't know, Carl, would you like to ask your question, and then I will go to Yvonne?
Yeah, thank you, Timna. John, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I am delighted to learn there are 6 principles and to see the categorization that you're working with and deciding what to do with the houses. But my question was that you talked about public expectations restraining strategic changes. but how do you plan to manage the internal, the staff and the volunteer expectations, which I often find are resistant to change and committed to the way things have been done in the past, since we're all preservationists?
That is a hugely interesting question and conversation, and I think you are absolutely spot on. I talked about external sort of challenge and questions and concerns at times. For me, I think the biggest change that I'm responsible for as a leader at the National Trust is the cultural change at the National Trust. I think it is about a shift and change more, as I've described, towards audiences, towards needs, and I tell you what. Let me make that tangible. We set our different sort of professional groups up around historic houses, fundamentally, as you said, as to preserve. We are preservationists at heart. That's what's being tasked of us. So, my collections management team, or my collections conservation team, we load on them the heavy responsibility of caring for collections or historic interiors, and that feels like a weight on their shoulders. But actually, of course, fundamentally, conservators are access enablers. That's what conservation is all about. Conservation is only about thinking about access in the future, as well as it's thinking about access today. So I suppose we are going through a journey of trying to think quite differently about our professions and our approach. And I don't think that means to sort of reassure you and colleagues, I don't think that means caring less for the places in our care. I just think it means looking at them from the other end of a telescope, approaching them differently. And actually, the core of my responsibility in our future strategy is being described not as conservation, but as access. And I do see conservation and creation as being yin and yang, being very much part of the same thing. So I think what I would say is yes. I think the key the most important shift actually in terms of making changes for our own teams and for volunteers. And I think particularly because I work across hundreds of historic houses, and I can get excited about the importance of evolution and new meanings and new stories, but change is always difficult, isn't it? And the people who've worked in a particular historic house for 20 years or more become very attached to that historic house in one form. So Carl, I haven't got the answer to that, but that is, if that's the story of your journey, it's absolutely the story of our journey. And to be clear, I'm not saying that I am right and I've got the answers, and that somebody else or the teams I work with or the volunteers are not right. That there's no, there is a constant dialogue that needs to go on. Well, the only other thing that I would just raise quickly as a challenge on the back of that is that, as I said, I'd be interested in whether others are finding this. I'm not sure that some of the my background is museums, so I worked for 15 years, for example, at the British Museum in London, but I'm not sure that some of the ways of working that we've applied in museums, some of the standards that we've applied, are quite working for what I need in historic houses in terms of flexibility and ability to incorporate new collections quickly, to tell new stories, to get more people involved, to move things around quickly. And sometimes I can say, even that wonderful manual of housekeeping that the National Trust has published, I worry that it focuses so much on preservation that it really loses what we're talking about in this conference, which is our communities, our audiences.
I think on that point, it's preservation, and the book on the housekeeping is very much part of the old style, as opposed to this very new way that many historic house museums are taking now of looking at community as things develop. We really are running out of time, and there's been a fascinating conversation going on in the chat about colonialization and decolonialization. Yvonne, would you like, you were the first to make a comment about it. Would you like to come back to that? And we'll see if we manage. I think we can have 5 minutes more for this session, then we have to take a break. So I think, Yvonne, if you just touch on it, and then afterwards we can look at some of the responses in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Timna, and thank you, John, for an amazing talk. And if the talk is amazing, you get lots of responses, which is amazing as well, because we all care about topics. So about this colonizing, oh, it's a very difficult word for me, and you see in the chat happening a lot. So I think it's important. That's what my question was about. If you think like 100 houses have like slavery traces or issues or nations, I think it's important to think, what are we going to do with it? And are we thinking about ways to decolonize or not? I mean, you don't have to, but I think it's important to be aware, what are we going to do with it? There's a big international discussion on decolonizing museums. ICOM does their part on it. So we have to face that reality, and we have to be thinking about arguments where we're going to do it or not. And what I witness in the Netherlands, we have not only in the Netherlands, but worldwide, we have also this climate activism. And I think if like the audience doesn't feel museums are on their side about things that are not right, we get them against us. So I think it's important to let audience know that we're with them, and we say colonialism isn't right, climate, the things we're going isn't right. We are aware of that, and we take our responsibility. So I was wondering how are you going to deal with this in this 100 National Trust houses that have to face this problem? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry, I must have spoken for longer than I meant to, because I wanted longer for the conversation. So apologies for that. That teaches me for not using a script. It's my fault for just speaking. Anyway, I suppose this is one of the biggest questions on our minds. I mean, I'm not sure there is a choice in this. There's certainly a choice in terms of how we approach the process. And the report that we produced 3 or 4 years ago was only our beginning of that conversation. So at a minimum, what we are determined to do and really feel is our sort of purpose and feels unarguable is to present fully the history of each of the places in our care, but actually not just to do that ourselves, but to involve other people in doing that. So to create a conversation and a debate around each one. Having done a report like that attracted a lot of criticism as well as some support, it's made me realize that actually the most important thing is not writing a report, but it's doing it. It's the work on the ground. It's working with your local communities. It's working with international communities in that particular conversation. So for us, that is just work that is ongoing. What perhaps my last thought would just be that, so we have a lovely example where we have a very active conversation with an international community as well as a local community, and actually it's at that place I mentioned them, but it's not the house itself. All in the grounds of Clarendon is a Maori, a New Zealand, a Maori meeting house, and that house came over to the UK about 100 years ago. And we have agreed with both the local Maori community in London and the international Maori community that the historic carvings of that meeting house will be returned to New Zealand. They are sacred carvings. They are part of a living being of Hinamihi, a sacred being, and they will return. They also couldn't be presented outside any longer anyway, so they were becoming museum pieces. But in exchange, and I think this is my last point, and this is the key thing, that is not simply a restitution or an act of decolonization. In exchange, the descendants of the people who made those first Maori carvings for Hinamihi will produce some new Maori carvings, and those new carvings will come to the UK and will be put on a new meeting house that will be used by the local Maori community in a very active sense, as a sacred space, as a place of meeting and gathering and partying and community and all of those things. So actually, I talked about Clarendon as my endpoint, but Hinamihi almost for me is the perfect encapsulation of that. And it's not decolonization in an aggressive sense. We're not trying to make a political point or be politically correct. We're just having a very open, active conversation with a local community and with an international community.
Thank you. John, I suggest you take a moment when the session ends to go into the chat and see some of the other comments about this. We just unfortunately really do not have time to go into them right now. I think, as we all know, this is becoming a very complex issue for many of us, and I think most house museums will find creative ways to come to a solution that works for the local community, the layering of the narrative of the house, and of course respecting the indigenous cultures that who had their pieces removed over the years. So thank you, John, again for a very enlightening keynote presentation. I really hope you will stay with us over the rest of today's session and be able to join us over the next few days. And we would like to hear, obviously, also from you in our general discussions. We're going to take a 10-minute break rather than the original 15. But while you all get up, stretch your legs, go make yourself a drink, please know that we will be putting into the chat a link to a quiz. It's a yes/no answer quiz. It will be up and running for the next 2 days, and for the next 2 days. And then on the last day, the responses from the quiz will help us have a final discussion during our wrap-up session. So I think that Caroline or Nicoletta is going to put, there you go, Caroline has put it into the chat now, link to yes/no survey. So if you can all go into that either now or later. We will keep every break, we will remind you. And so we will meet back here at 1:15, whatever hour you happen to be in. Okay, so 10-minute break and see you all soon. And again, thank you, John. Thank you, Caroline, Nicoletta, and Cecilia for working furiously behind the scenes, keeping this going. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're now going to go to our first paper presentation session. Yvonne Ploum, previous DEMHIST chair, current councillor, spokesperson of the International Committees of ICOM and executive director of Heritage Academy Netherlands, will be moderating the session. Yvonne, over to you.
Thank you very much, Timna, and thank you very much, everyone joining today in the FT Open Talks. We have a session on Inspire, and we have two speakers today. First is Maria Szadkowska. We all know her. She was DEMHIST board for the previous term. She's working as chief curator at the Museum of Prague in the Czech Republic, and she'll talk about Božena Rodmajerova, Modern Woman versus Domesticity. Maria, the floor is yours.
Yvonne, thank you very much for introducing me, and welcome. I'm very happy and thank you for this opportunity to be with you. I'm very happy to see all of you again. And I'm starting. Yes. So today, using the story of one artist, the wife of the famous Prague architect Otto Rottmeier, I would like to show how various the ways of interpreting exhibition in house museum can be. Thanks to the authenticity of the house museums, we can be transported back in time and get a glimpse into the everyday life of the inhabitants of the time. Unlike large museum exhibition, the exhibits here are not removed from their natural environment. On the contrary, it is their placement in their original context that gives the whole experience exceptional depth and credibility. So the Villa Rottmeier in Prague was built in 1928, and it is a unique example of classicizing modernism. After complete renovation in 2014, the villa was opened as a house museum, offering a unique insight into the life and work of its author. The main theme of the presentation is the architecture of the house and the personality of Otto Rothmeier. The stories of the other members of the Rothmeier family were originally seen more as a complementary element that brings the atmosphere of the house and its former inhabitants closer to visitors. Gradually, however, it became clear that these human histories had the power to draw visitors deeper into the history of the house. The combination of fascinating architecture and personal narrative truth makes the Rothmeier Villa a place that will appeal not only to specialized but also to the general public. Otto Rothmeier's wife, Bożena, long remained in the shadow of her famous husband. It is only through careful research into her personal artistic career that previously hidden the unpublished aspect of her life have begun to emerge, offering a fascinating view of her role not only in her family but also in a larger social context. A key discovery was Bożena's correspondence with Alice Masaryk, daughter of the first Czechoslovak president, Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk. From these letters, an image emerges of a woman who not only created her own world, but also took an active role in the formation of the idea of the emancipated modern woman in the first half of the 20th century. After the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, women's emancipation was one of the most important social transformations, one that fundamentally changed the shape of modern society. After the First World War, when women had to take the place of men serving at the front, they gradually began to assert themselves not only in working life, but also in public and cultural life. And Bożena Rothmeier was one of these inspirational figures. The birth of the First Republic started the process of modernization and women emancipation. The figure of the so-called modern or civilized women was one of the triggers of this process. Women were happy dresses up in uniforms of policewomen or airplane pilots. In Czechoslovakia, this moment developed with great intensity and became a symbol of the need of freedom and change. The iconic feature of the time was the cut hair braid, which represented a departure from the traditional roles of social norms. Women changed their hairstyles, wrote poems, went on excursions, and smoked cigarettes, not only expressing their sense of newfound freedom, but also taking a bold stand against the established rules. In 1928, an exhibition of modern women was held in Czechoslovakia, which caused a sensation and offered the avant-garde of the time the opportunity to use the female question to promote functionalism. The exhibition focused on new forms of housing, dress reform, and historical overview of women's fashion. Alice Masaryk, daughter of the President Masaryk, was involved in the creation of the new modern line style in Prague Castle, which at the time was beginning architectural rebuilt into a modern residence for democratic president. Raised by her American mother, Alice brought a new image of the First Lady as an ideal of an emancipated woman. Thanks to her close cooperation and friendship with the daughter of the first democratic president, Bożena Rotmajer was given the opportunity of the lifetime to participate in the new design of the presidential residence in the Prague Castle. Bożena Rotmajer was involved in the reform of women fashion, working to liberate women from conventional styles. She contributed to the evolution of the culture, art, and lifestyles of working, intelligent European women. Rotmajer emphasized the simplicity and cleanliness of the cuts, which were material saving, reducing their production costs. This made her garments more accessible to wider range of the population. Many of her designs were inspired by folk patterns and traditional Czech textile, which she modernized and adapted to contemporary needs. She also emphasized the quality of materials and the functionality of the clothes, so that they not only looked good, but also were very comfortable and durable. Bożena Rotmajerowa created also a collection on functional lingerie that stood out for its simplicity and practicality. The lingerie was made from natural materials such as cotton, wool, ensuring comfort and breathability. She completely avoided ornaments and embellishments to make the lines easy to care for, wearable, and versatile. The tie as an accessory to women's clothing was not just momentary fad, but rather a significant symbol of the struggle for equality between women and men. During the 20th century, especially during the emancipation movements, women began to adopt elements traditionally considered masculine to add to their demand for equality in society. The tie, which for centuries had been associated with male authority and professionalism, thus became a manifestation of the part of women of their determination to enter a sphere where they had previously been denied access. The garments designed by Rotmajer were often multi-purpose and versatile, allowing easy mixing and matching for different occasions. Also interesting were the attempts to work directly with fabrics without unnecessary embellishments, often opting for natural colors and simple designs that were both practical and aesthetics. The social changes and the position of women at this time, especially after establishment of First Republic, reflect a shift towards a more equal society. Bożena Rotmajer used her talents to create sustainable wardrobes for middle-class working women and also focused on modern children's fashion and practical accessory. Here you can see wardrobe for modern child, dresses for nursery, kindergarten, and school. Bożena Rotmajer was not only a talented artist, but also a modern and practical-minded mother who managed to combine work with caring for her young child. Even when caring for her baby, she tried to adopt innovative approaches. One of her ideas was a modern swaddle inspired by the folk tale that wrapping a baby tightly helps it feel safe. Another important part of the modern women's practical domesticity was the dining table, which had to be not only aesthetic but also simple, easy to maintain, and versatile. Bożena Rotmajer believed that beauty lay in simplicity and naturalness. She therefore preferred a natural wooden tabletop, which it in itself added warmth and authenticity to the interior. Bożena Rotmeier was an exceptional personality who was ahead of her time with her life and work, and represented the ideal of modern woman. As a talented designer, artist, and wife of architect, she managed to combine aesthetics, practicality, and distinctive style that inspired a generation. It is important to remind today's generation of her not only as artist but also as a woman who managed to reconcile her professional ambition with the professional life and stay true to her values. I hope that I have been able to show how important the connection with the stories of their original owners can be in the presentation of house museums. Stories that at first may not seem like the main thematic line, hide an expected potential for an often deeper understanding of history and society. The story of Bożena Rotmeier is a great example of this. Her life and her role in the household not only enriched the Rotmeier villa itself, but also helped to illustrate the fundamental changes that shape the position of women in the modern household in the 20th century. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Maria, and that was amazing. I think we all love that. It's a pity that we need a war to get things changed, but sometimes this is how it works. I think we have a few minutes for questions. Everyone's paying full attention, so I don't see questions in the chat for now. So maybe I'll go on to Flo. If you have a question, please put your name in the chat and I can see it. Otherwise, I have one. Let me start then with the question, Maria. You told us in the beginning that actually the two men, the architect, Mr. Rotmeier, and the president were the only thematic access for the house. Now you added another layer to the house, the story of Rotmeier-Rova, Bożena Rotmeier-Rova. If we now go to the villa, because we were there with DEMHIST, which was amazing 2 years ago in Prague. If we go to the villa now, do we see another villa? Do we see another story? How is the story being shown in the museum in the villa now? Did it change your approach to the villa and your designing and programming the villa?
Yes, as you know, we started with architecture, of course, because we are historian of architecture, so the modernism and functionalism in Prague is very important style. Mm-hmm. And maybe for this reason, we forgot a little bit about the normal history of those houses, and it's not only the Villa Rotmeier with Bożena Rotmeier-Rova, but also Milada Millerova in the Villa Miller, designed by Adolf Loos, is very, very our top team for today. So we tried to find new topics, how to present both houses to bigger visitors and family with children and so on. So I think two great women was the best opportunity how to do that.
Mm-mm. So we'll see her dresses and her tablecloths in the museum when we visit next. Would be an exciting exhibition, I think. But thank you very much, Maria. There are many comments in the chat. Please go and look at the chat. It's more about comments than questions. So thank you very much. And we have to, like this is always a matter of time as well, we have to go to the next presentation. This is Liisa Oikari. She is from the Mannerheim Museum in Finland. And she will talk about the rise of humanitarian values, museums as platforms for resilience. Could we have the next presentation, please? Thank you, Maria.
Thank you.
Dear participants of the DEMHIST Open Talk Conference, it is an honor to be giving you a presentation today. My name is Liisa Oikari. I work as a researcher at the Mannerheim Museum in Helsinki, Finland. My main focus at the museum is the museum collection, but I also work a lot with exhibitions. As a museum professional, I am very interested in museums' impact on society and museums' part in creating a sustainable future. My presentation in this session, Inspire, touches on the topic of values, resilience, and museums' impact on society. I approached the topic with an example, a temporary exhibition shown in the Mannerheim Museum last year in 2023. The museum has a permanent exhibition consisting of home interiors, but we also have a temporary special exhibition every year in various topics. The main drive for these temporary exhibitions is to address current topics and give fresh and new perspectives on current issues. The museum wishes to make an impact and create discussion. An exhibition concerning values and resilience in societies felt like a very topical subject for an exhibition in today's uncertain world. The idea of the exhibition came to me while reading the morning paper and being floored by all the simultaneous crises happening in our world. From climate change to the aftermath of COVID and possible future pandemics, wars and the feeling of lack of togetherness and respect amongst humankind. My presentation is filled with photos that will give you something nice to look at while I talk, and also get an idea of what the exhibition looked like and what sort of objects were on display. First, a little bit about my museum. The Mannerheim Museum is the former home of Gustav Mannerheim, a respected Finn who was born in 1867 and died in 1951. Mannerheim was an aristocrat born to a noble family, but also an officer and a statesman. He served in the Imperial Russian Army for 30 years when Finland was a part of Russia in the 1800s. But he is internationally probably best known for serving as the commander-in-chief of the Finnish Defence Force during World War II. After the war, he briefly served as the President of Finland. His home in Kaivopuisto, Helsinki, was made into a museum shortly after his death in 1951 and has been open ever since. Regarding Finland's history in the 20th century, Mannerheim's influence in the society has been vast in many ways. One of the most important areas that he was involved in was humanitarian work in the first half of the 1900s. In the 1920s, 30s and 40s, the founding steps for the Finnish welfare state were created. This important work that Mannerheim was involved in is often neglected, as Mannerheim's accomplishments as a soldier are emphasized in history books, research and media. The resilience of a society and the well-being of its members was especially important to Mannerheim. He recognized the importance of long-term effects in building a prosperous society and in the upbringing of its healthy citizens. In our exhibition Good Deeds, we wanted to show that building a welfare state is not easy. It takes a lot of work, passion and ideology. We wanted to remind today's audiences of what Finland was like in the beginning of its independence in 1917 and how much work it has taken to shape it to what it is today. The abundance we live amongst today was not created on its own, but with hard work and perseverance. Forming perspective between how things have been and how they are now was one of the messages we wanted to get across. Future doesn't just happen. It is created, and it is in all our hands to shape the future to what we want it to be. We wanted to create hope. Most importantly, we wanted to create the exhibition together with humanitarian organizations and give them space to present their history and impact, and also tell people about the work they do today and how anyone can get involved and offer help to those in need. The exhibition focused on two organizations meaningful to Gustav Mannerheim, the Finnish Red Cross and the Mannerheim League for Child Welfare. The exhibition introduces the organizations by diving into their founding history and into their achievements throughout the years. The impact and relevance of the organizations was also discussed, as well as their present activities and international work. The exhibition was created in cooperation with the aforementioned organizations, the Finnish Red Cross and the Mannerheim League for Child Welfare. The organizations chosen had a strong link to Gustav Mannerheim, and he acted as a common denominator and as a bridge between the organizations. The exhibition also included other known humanitarian organizations active in Finland, from health and cancer research to mental health issues and nature conservation. Humanitarian work and volunteering as a societal and cultural historical phenomenon was reflected on. We wanted to bring forth the importance of different foundations and their expertise. Maybe even inspire museum visitors to donate to these actors. Mannerheim served as the chair of the Finnish Red Cross from 1922 to his death in 1951. The Red Cross, and especially its international connections, became extremely important during the Second World War, and Mannerheim mastered his double role as the head of the Finnish army as well as the chair of the Finnish Red Cross. During the years that Mannerheim served as the organization's chair, the Finnish Red Cross increased its involvement in international projects and developed ways of fundraising. Mannerheim's legacy can still be seen in the activities of the Finnish Red Cross. In the exhibition, this topic was divided into 3 themes: history of the Red Cross and history of the Finnish Red Cross, Mannerheim's time as the chair of the organization, and presenting the various ways the Finnish Red Cross acts today. The Mannerheim League for Child Welfare was created by a group of healthcare and childcare professionals, one of them being Gustav Mannerheim's sister, Sophie Mannerheim. She wanted her brother to contribute to the organization and help with fundraising. Gustav Mannerheim served as an honorary chair until his death. The foundation was established in 1920, and its main focus was the well-being of children. Child mortality rate was very high in Finland at the time, and the League made tackling that issue their main priority during the very first years of action. The education of nurses was a big part of the organization's functions in the beginning, as well as offering information of childcare and training for new mothers. Later on, hosting educational clubs and summer camps for kids became a big part of the League's activities. The Mannerheim League of Child Welfare is still an active organization in Finland, and it is very respected and a trusted actor. Especially in the recent years, the League has emphasized the role of Sophie Mannerheim, Gustav Mannerheim's sister, as the main implementer of the League. This was the viewpoint that we also took at the museum exhibition, bringing Sophie and all the other women that were a part of the history of the League to the front. In the exhibition, this topic was divided into 3 themes: history of the Mannerheim League for Child Welfare, Gustav Mannerheim's part in the activities of the League, and finally, presenting the various ways the League is part of the Finnish society today. For the working group at the museum, the most important aspect of the exhibition was that it served as a platform to reflect on and advocate for humanity and equality amid contemporary challenges. Actors in the humanitarian sector can offer valuable knowledge and skills on crisis management as societies are facing an uncertain future. For the working group, making this exhibition was an extremely gratifying experience, and I truly hope that we made an impact and were able to bring forth the importance of humanitarian values and the need for them in this day and age. The exhibition also served as a spark for discussion concerning accountability and social sustainability, themes that intersect every function of a society in the 2020s. Humanitarian values can help build a sustainable and equal society. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you a lovely conference
Thank you,
experience.
Liisa.
I will be attending the whole 3 days, so if you
See
have
if I
any
can
questions,
find you
just
in the
reach out.
screen.
Thank you.
I am.
Here, I am here. Can you see me?
Oh, yeah. I think you're behind another block of my screen. Thank you very much, Liisa. This was amazing. And actually the same as Maria told us, sometimes we just overlook sides of persons or complete persons in history, and they're important. So it's great that you also, this other side of Gustav Mannerheim and his sister brought onto the stage. And of course, what you told us, you wanted to create hope, and putting in this humanitarian values into the museum game, I would actually say. So I'm interested, there's some questions for Liisa. Do museums recognize that? We have only a few minutes. I'm sorry, but otherwise I would be really interested, Liisa, in what was how did the audience responded? What did they think about those kind of exhibitions into historic house museums? Can you tell something about that?
I would say that the response was very positive. It was maybe quite a surprising topic for our audience, because they come to see the house of a former president, and many were not, as I said in the presentation, many were maybe not even aware of him having a role in the Red Cross. And also in the Mannerheim League. So it was very nice that we could offer new information about a very kind of an old topic. Mannerheim is very known in Finland, so to bring something new to this is very, very gratifying.
Yeah. A new layer. And did they donate?
I don't know. I would love to know this, but I don't know.
Okay. Timna, you have a question.
Yes, first of all, thank you both, Maria and Liisa, for very interesting topics and talks. I think it's so important to have these other narratives brought to the fore in these houses, and to be able to expand the story of our houses. Liisa, I wanted to ask, and I don't know if I just missed it, how much community engagement was there within this exhibition and this league? I assume it's still ongoing. It still has its effects on community medicine and healthcare and welfare. So, was there also engagement on that level within the exhibition with the house?
You mean with the actor?
Mm-hmm. With the actor, and just generally, with whether it created a discussion about welfare, and if groups coming in were discussing the ways that they see it now acting and the effect that it had on them.
Yeah, I would think so, that groups that saw the exhibition, they were really interested in what these organizations do today, and how they impact today's society. So there were really interesting discussions on kind of the value of humanitarian work.
Great.
Okay, thank you. How do other museums, like, I think I see the time schedule changing. So I think, we have another few minutes. Is that right, Timna?
I think ask Caroline, because I've lost track of where.
Yeah, I just now see his coffee break in 7 minutes, so we can have a few minutes of discussion. And I think it's very interesting to see how other museums maybe approach those kind of unknown stories. Is this a thing that others are inspired to do that as well? Maybe some just ideas from others? Or other museums, they already approach those kind of topics?
Iris Kokelberg was talking in the discussion about a project that her museum has been doing. So Iris, would you like to talk about that for a moment? Iris, are you still with us?
I think she should be there, but maybe we lost her. We lost her for a while. Yeah, and I see Cecilia is working on a thing as well. I talk about only part of the family that are on display in the houses, and there are more family members. Cecilia, can you say something about that? Overlooking part of the family.
Yes, we have been focusing on the founding family of the museum because it's been our first 1 century anniversary of the opening of the museum to the public and the foundation of the museum. But in those years, we are also making a research with the team of the Cerralbo Museum about the inhabitants of the palace, which means also the maids, the butlers, the other people that live in the palace, and sometimes they lived here with their wives, their husbands, their children. And we are researching on the books of the village about the registers of the inhabitants of the building during the decades of the 19th and 20th century. And it's been very interesting.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. I think in general, if I look back to this, like we have the talk of John and then Maria and then Liisa, it's actually everything is about how can we find new ways and other ways to work as historic house museums, to serve a nowadays society in a different way than only our very much historical part. How can we make use of this story of the houses and tell it in a different way and add new layers to it? And in this, as you already mentioned, Liisa, very difficult society, it's really interesting to think every time again, what can we do more? How can we serve society? How can we do better? Which stories weren't told? Which part of the stories we weren't on display? And to find new ways to work in that way, I think. I think then, if no more questions, Timna, or Caroline, I think we could close this inspirative session, which was it for me as well, and I think for all of us. Thank you very much, and I give back to I think Timna or to Caroline.
Okay, so yes, I think we will close this session now, and we will have a short 10-minute break before we go to the virtual tours, after which we will have another short discussion. If people want to contribute then, obviously they can. Caroline, over to you.
Yeah, just to, for people, enjoy your break, but if you want to stay around, we have a very short video that we'll keep playing, using some of the answers that you gave us to questions that we asked you when you registered for the open talks.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the next session of virtual tours. When we originally had a call for papers for our conference this year, we had a number of proposals that were directly as posters or seemed better to be posters. And when we turned the conference into the open talks, into this online event, we thought that they would actually make wonderful virtual tours of various locations. And we asked the presenters to make that extra step of producing videos to share with all of us. And Milja Stijovic is going to present the next session of the first group of virtual tours. Milja.
Thank you, Timna. Just to greet all of you who connected after the break for the first time maybe, and remind you that session 1, Inspiring a Shift of Values, marks the opening of open talks focusing on the theme of inspiration. It highlights the transformative role of house museums in connecting with communities, preserving cultural heritage, and promoting societal growth. Through storytelling and collections, these museums aims to celebrate local history, encourage ethical reflection, and contribute to cultural sustainability and development, inspiring both current and future generations. As Timna well said, we are thrilled to unveil an exciting addition to a program, exclusive video tours made especially for open talks. To remind everyone, as Caroline said, please set the volume of the video. And for Inspire video session, it is my pleasure to announce to you the first video from Slovenia, presented by Matjas Koman from Žirovnica Institute for Tourism and Culture. The video presents the 5 historic houses on the Žirovnica path of cultural heritage, and it's truly inspiring and not just for DEMHIST community. Please enjoy.
Welcome to Žirovnica Cultural Heritage Trail, Slovenia's first and oldest themed trail that connects 5 house museums. This 10-kilometer circular walking trail takes you on an adventure to the birdhouses of 5 legendary masters of Slovenian literature. These incredible people helped shape and celebrate the Slovenian language, culture, poetry, and the country's national identity. Today, their homes have been transformed into house museums, just waiting for you to explore and soak up the wealth of cultural heritage they represent. So, lace up your walking shoes and get ready for a journey through history. Come on.
Iskra v očeh, na mojih ustnicah smeh.
It is here that all began with house museums in Slovenia. Prešeran's birdhouse. It is the first house that was converted into a museum in Slovenia way back in 1939. This place isn't just a museum. It's a magical time machine that transports you into the life and work of France Prešeren. Prešeran's birthplace is one of the oldest houses in Vrba. The original building was built in the 16th century. Its present appearance dates from 1856, when part of the house was destroyed by a fire. Some original features from the 16th century are still present, such as the stone cellar portal along with some Baroque flair. The house, which was declared a cultural monument of national importance in 2011, holds the title of being Slovenia's first house museum, and it is the most visited museum of its kind in the country, attracting around 20,000 visitors annually. It also serves as a representative model for house museums in Slovenia, as the model of musealization implanted here in 1939 was later used in other houses museums across Slovenia. Prešeron's birdhouse is currently undergoing a complete renovation, and in a year or two it's going to become a part of a grand museum complex dedicated to France Prešeren.
Zimo in maj, vidim nebo, ki pozlati, vidim domače ljudi. Vidim nebo.
So here we are at Chop's birthhouse, a delightful blend of intellect and culture. Meet Matjas Chop, a brilliant friend and mentor to France Prešeren, who made waves in the linguistic world. He was one of the most educated Europeans of its time, mastering an impressive 19 languages. Although this charming house isn't fully original, it collapsed during renovations, it still offers an intriguing glimpse into Chop's life. Featuring exhibition on Chop and the Aidna archaeological site, it's the only dedicated spot for both in Slovenia. In addition, it serves as a community event space, making it a hub for local gatherings. This house museum, which has been declared a monument of local importance, invites you to explore rich cultural heritage.
Znova se pisem rodi, znova se pisem rodi, sem doma.
So let's buzz on over to Anton Janša's apiary. While his birdhouse didn't survive, this buzzing spot is a sweet reminder of his legacy. You'll find a memorial plaque that once adored his home right in front of the apiary. Meet Anton Janša, the bee whisperer and the first teacher of beekeeping in Austro-Hungarian Empire. Even Empress Maria Theresia in Vienna decreed that all beekeepers should follow Anton Janša's principles. He penned two influential books that are still relevant today. And don't forget Anton Janša's birthday, 20th of May, which has been declared a World Bee Day, which celebrates his invaluable contribution to beekeeping.
Tu zažari iskra v oči, na mojih ustnicah smeh.
This one is real hidden gem, Finžgar's birdhouse, a cozy nook where literature blooms. Step inside the birthplace of Franz Saleški Finžgar, a wordsmith who inspired countless hearts and minds. This humble abode provides a taste of late 19th century living in Gorenska. Picture the black smoke kitchen, pantry and chambers arranged just as Finžgar described them. This house museum has been declared a cultural monument of national importance. Did you know that Finžgar himself was instrumental in the transformation of Prešeren's birdhouse into Slovenia's first house museum? Welcome to Jalen's birdhouse, a home of significant Slovenian writer, playwright and clergyman. This historical gem is one of the village's oldest buildings, which once served as the vicar's office for the local church before it was rebuilt in stone following the fiery misshape in the 17th century. The house was declared a cultural monument of local importance in 1987 and has been welcoming visitors since 1997. So when you're in Slovenia, You are warmly welcome to visit our house museums on Žirovnica Cultural Heritage Trail.
Topla jesen, zima in maj, vidim nebo, ki pozlati, vidim domače ljudi. Vidim nebo, ki pozlati, vidim domače.
And thank you, Matjas, for this lovely video tour. We will wait for questions. And now I present to you the second video, which is from Croatia, made by Katarina Pocedic and Katarina Maric from Historical and Maritime Museum of Istria. The video will transfer us to the Pula Fort Center. Let's take a look.
Hello everyone, we are from the Historical and Maritime Museum of Istria, located in Pula, the southernmost part of the Istrian Peninsula in Croatia. Today we'll be sharing with you how our project, the Pula Fort Center, it transformed our city's historic fortifications into a vibrant cultural and educational space that connects people with their heritage in a new and exciting way. Our museum is situated in the Castle Fortress, locally known as Castel, which stands proudly at the heart of Pula, above the city center. This is the city's oldest fortification, once a key Christian monarchy's system. It's not just a monument, but a living where history, local community. The castle was constructed in 1660 and 1933 during the conflicts of the 30 Years' War in the Republic. It became the centerpiece of monarchy's fortress of Pula, guarding the most important military. The Historical and Maritime Museum of Istria, where we preserve and share the various history of our region. And beneath the castle lies a hidden marvel. Below our fortress there is a network of tunnels known as Zirostrasse. This two-level tunnel system, with 4 branches leading into the city, was built between the First and the Second World War, as part of the military infrastructure. Since 2011, these tunnels have been repurposed as a gallery space for our museum, offering visitors a unique underground experience. The problem we faced, however, was that the castle and the tunnels, despite being a part of the same heritage site, were not physically connected. We realized that in order to truly bring this historic area to life, we needed to do more than just preserve it, we needed to connect it. In 2019, in collaboration with the City of Pula and the Tourist Office, we embarked on a project that would become the Pula Fort Center. The vision was to showcase Pula's extensive fortification heritage and integrate the museum with the town center. The heart of this project was the construction of a lift that would connect all 3 levels, the Zirostrasse tunnels, the underground fortress, and the fort atrium. Our aim was to reinvigorate the site, making it more accessible and exciting for both and visitors. Which in 2020 and 2022 is undertaking. But after the lift was, and for the first time, the were physically connected. This paved the way for a brand new visitor center with an exhibition and multimedia presentation, offering a deeper understanding of Pula's fortification system.
The exhibition now serves as a starting point for anyone wanting to explore Pula's rich fortification history. It provides visitors with a sense of the sheer scale, clear and simple design, and sophisticated nature of these historical structures. We have incorporated a mix of traditional exhibits, modern multimedia solutions, aiming to make history accessible to everyone. One particularly emotional part of the exhibition is where we show what life was like inside the fortress. Visitors get a glimpse into the daily lives of soldiers, seeing their personal belongings, their grand pets, and even the latrines. It's a space that evokes powerful emotions, going from laughter to deep reflections. Beyond the historical significance, this project has had a profound impact on the community. By integrating the fortification with the city center, we have created new opportunities for cultural and educational activities that directly benefit Pula's residents and visitors. We have made inclusivity a priority, not just in terms of accessibility, but also by fostering a deeper connection between the community and the heritage sites in their own neighborhoods. Around the city, there are about 25 fortresses. Almost every school in Pula has one nearby which they consider their own. So, we often organize educational projects with schools, kindergartens, and community organizations. This is why this project has deepened those ties. The fortifications are no longer just remnants of the past, they are living spaces where history, culture, and the community converge. However, this project has also raised important questions. How do we continue to manage and protect these sites while making them accessible and relevant to the community? To address this, we have worked with the local authorities to form a task force that ensures ongoing preservation, better planning, and closer engagement with both the local administration and the visitors of the sites. The Pula Fort Center has shown us that when we link our heritage to the present, we create a powerful bridge to the future. It is not just about preserving the past, it's about making it a meaningful part of our everyday life. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you, ladies from Croatia. And I managed to show the questions. The question for Matjas: have you been able to track number of visitors? And the second from Hilary Walker is: does the community use the trail on their own without museum visits?
Okay, thank you. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. No, for not, we were not able to track the number of hikers on the trail. But however, this year we plan to purchase a digital counter, which will allow us to gather some data. But for now, we were just gathering data from the tickets to specific house museums, and we got some numbers of approximately how many visitors are on this trail. And yes, of course, locals use this trail even though if they don't visit the museums. They just go and maybe sit at the museum, but a lot of them go inside the museums, but not everyone.
Okay, and a question from Ximena: how does the ticketing works?
The ticketing, we offer a combined ticket for all the 5 places to visit, which offers some discount as well. But I mean, that's very interesting for I don't know, let's say for primary or high school students when they are organizing a sport or cultural day. They walk along our trail and actively discover this cultural heritage in the process.
And Timna, do you want to ask a question?
I have a very important question to ask Matjas. The music, that wonderful song that was the background, can you please put in the chat a link to where we can download it?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, that's very interesting. That is our local celebrity. He's a singer and author. He's Alexander Mejak. He was very big in the 70s in the UK. Alexander John, he used to play with Cliff Richard. And his songs are very inspired by these our houses and all of this nature. And actually, we are still working with him. He organizes every year a concert at Presheran's birdhouse, and it's very nice. I'll post the link. Thank you.
And you have a really nice comment from Cecilia Matjas next, David Attenborough. So I have a question for you. If there is no question for you in the chat, if no one wants, I have a question. In what ways do these museums help younger generation connect with Slovenia's historical figures and their contributions?
I mean, children are our primary target audience. Approximately 80 or 90% of our visitors are actually children or from elementary school and from 1st to 9th grade. And recently, we've also noticed an increase of high school groups and even some student groups that study in literature and the Slovenian language. And we have several examples how we cater to these target groups. We organize various workshops, including some for preschool children. We have prepared worksheets for all the houses and their inhabitants for all 3 primary school levels. And I don't know, we've created many short films for the visitors, and they can watch this in our houses for better understanding of our content. For instance, in Chop's Birdhouse, visitors can view this short documentary that introduce all the house museums and all of these famous people that live there. And in Presheran Birdhouse, it's an interesting example where we produced a short, like 7 minutes animated film that presents Presheran's life and work. And it's very, it shows, I mean, like his work and life in a very fun and engaging way. But additional, I don't know, our local, I mean, our guides, they're all local and they try to be, very engaging in their tours. They all speak in local dialect, which is also very interesting and fun for the children who are not from around here. So we try to be engaging. We try various, this media and things to do for children to better connect to our heritage.
Thank you so much. Do we have question for Katarina? 1 and 2 Katarinas? Or can I ask, because yes. I have plenty of questions for the ladies as well. Does someone wants to take the mic?
Timna wants. Timna.
I have just a quick question and then I'll return it to you, Milja. Thank you for what was a wonderful presentation and the way that you really get a sense of the site and the way above ground, on the ground, below ground. It really was fantastic. I want to ask about just the actual construction of that elevator, of the lift, and your ability to use the underground space. How much intervention was actually made on the original site? Was there what kind of changes had to be made to make that fluidity of space actually happen?
Okay, hi everyone. But it wasn't that bad. The underground shelters were already there. And so we took a little bit, I think, like 20 square meters of construction site. So the 20 meters up, we built the hole, and that's pretty much it. We had the space, we had the good statics and everything. So we hadn't done much works.
Fantastic. And how much? I mean, obviously you pointed out some of the larger activities that have at events and community events that have happened at the site. how much is the site used on a daily basis through the year or through the summer months by groups of people just coming to visit and hang out? And is it a popular space?
Yeah, it is. We as a museum, we had like 50,000 visitors per year. And now we have more than 150,000 visitors of the year. So the museum works 12 hours a day, and it's a very good touristic site. And it became because of the tickets are free for the locals. So the locals use the underground shelters like pedestrian zone, so they can walk from one side of the city to another. So it's pretty much live locally. What do you say, Katarina?
I don't know if you can hear me, but since we built the elevator, it's really a spot, let's say, for the locals. They just pay a visit on daily basis to take a coffee on the highest point of the city, and it has been amazing, actually, backfeed of the local community to this new activity of our museum, because since the museum is on the hill and you had to be either fit or a very experienced driver to get to the museum. So now we are really accessible to everyone, and as said in the presentation, the inclusivity was very important for us. So that every visitor, no matter on disabilities or actually they don't have any disabilities, they have the same entrance and they use the same elevator, the same entrance. So this was actually the main point to make our museum inclusive for all type of visitors, local and tourists.
Okay, thank you. I think, Katarina, I think you're having some audio problems.
Yes.
So people who are hearing an echo, it's that's the reason, unfortunately, because I really want to keep listening to you. I think the point that you made about the visit is free for locals, I think that's a really important point here if we're talking about how do we make our sites accessible for our local community, how do we connect to them? I think that's a very important way to do it. Make it so that they can visit without it being a financial burden. Make it part of their daily life, and then it just becomes part of, I mean, yes, they use it as a pedestrian crossway, but I imagine they stop and they notice the things, and they learn about the history of the place while doing this. It just becomes absorbed into their understanding of the city. And I think that's a wonderful way to do that. Milja, you wanted questions, and I grabbed the mic from you, so I'm giving it back.
Thank you. And thank you again, ladies. And I have a question. When we are talking about inspiring and when we are talking about local, how does the Pula 4th Century inspire local artists, historians, educators to contribute to cultural heritage?
So there is one part of the exhibition is like made like some kind of info room where we placed the interactive table, which contains the three tablets in which we put everything we had about the fortification system. And there are lots of local organizations that love, like heritage lovers, I think, like Facebook groups or something like that. They all love fortifications, and they also send us some materials which they have, and we put it inside it. So the local community is gathering for us some photographs or some old maps or something like that on the in situ photographs, and we place it in there. So we have the connection with them at the regular basis.
And it is a room when we were planning and designing the exhibition, we wanted to be on different levels. So you can get the basic information about our fortifications, but also you can search and find different levels of knowledge and informations and photographs and actually information about the archives in which you can profound your research about our fortification. We have already multiple final exams from the University of Pula by the students. So this we have a very good approach with the local community, especially with experts, historians, and students.
Sorry, we have a question from Dominic. Is that local use fully supported financially by non-local people's payments?
Pretty much, but the project was financed by the city of Pula. So the citizens of Pula, they have a free entrance, but the others are paying, the tourists and the others are paying. So that's a little bit for our locals good, for the others not so good.
Timna, do I have a time for one question?
For one more question, yes.
Okay, so because of this lovely example of Pula Fort Center, how do you see Pula Fort Center inspiring in international heritage management practices in the years ahead? Do you have any connections with the same fortification systems in Europe, and do you see yourself as that inspiring dot for international heritage management system? Because I see you as such.
Sorry, Katarina, can you unmute?
Yes, we have just started to be a part of this Fortresses group, Fortresses Heritage group of European museums. We have presented the project on different conferences, and we are following the programs and the conferences of the Europa's Fortress, which is an important site regarding the conserving and presenting the fortifications heritage as a leading point, not yet, but maybe in the future.
Thank you. I was thinking about inspiring and heritage management because it was tremendous work, and bravo to you and to Matjas once again. Timna, over to you.
Thank you, Milja, for moderating. Thank you, Matjas and Katarina for really wonderful and inspiring videos. I think we are all planning how we can possibly arrange the next DEMHIST tour in in Croatia and Slovenia. Before we come to the wrap up, I think Roberto, who is one of the DEMHIST vice chairs and in charge of our communications, wanted to say a couple of words. Roberto, are you here?
Actually, yes, I wanted to invite you all to join us on our social media pages, because that's where we are making live posts about our open talks, and also for future references on the DEMHIST board meetings and future plans. So please join us at Instagram and Facebook. You can see our names there. Please join us on social media, because that's where we're heading in towards of communication and outreach for members and friends.
Thank you, Roberto. Now, as I promised you, at the end, after the meetings, we would do our first word cloud of the open talks. Caroline, will you explain how it works, because it's beyond me? I see a QR code and I get scared. So, Caroline,
okay, so I'm going. So you can either scan the QR code that you see here, or I'm going to copy paste a link in the chat. So it's just a simple question. So you click on the link, or you scan the QR code, and you answer the question, which is, who are our museums communities? And
okay,
I'm going to share my screen in a few.
Okay, and then once we see it all developing and making a beautiful pattern with different words, and we'll give it a couple of minutes, and then we can have an open discussion about it before we all say, that's it, I've had enough of sitting in front of this screen today. Okay, so let's go to the link and see how it goes. Fascinating looking at it metamorphose and change and grow and create different patterns. Let's give it another minute, and then we'll try and pick out some of the words, some of the groupings of words, because I think some of the words have similar connotations. Okay. Okay. Caroline, I think
this is so much fun.
Yeah, it is. It is a lot of fun.
So if people, so maybe we can close it.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. Let's look. Okay. So 30 seconds, and then we're going to close it off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so please stop answering.
Okay. Wow. So when I look at this, what's interesting is that what remained the biggest word for most of the time was staff. So I think it's interesting. So it's almost like where I began. Oh, lost it. When I made my opening remarks and I said our community are historical house museum professionals. So it's very much connecting to that in some ways. But I think the more interesting groupings of are the generational groupings that are within this. Kids, senior citizens, mothers and babies, kids with teachers, ladies with dogs, someone still stuck in the run up to the American elections, apparently. And then some other interesting groups here, obviously heritage professionals, conservators with sharp eyes. And if anyone else has particular words that they put in here that they want to make a comment about, they want to, obviously I really want this to be an open mic moment. I don't want to just be the only person picking out the words. So if anyone has any words that they particularly see here and want to connect to and explain maybe why they wrote that word or other groupings that they can see, please join the conversation.
I see Instagram influencer.
And I'm glad that someone equalized the mother with babies with fathers with babies. I think what comes very the missing and invisible as part of our community. I think that's a very evocative and important phrase connecting to the whole issue of intangible heritage, which is becoming such an important conversation across the heritage and museum world at the moment. How do we give
the
expression?
missing and invisible.
Yes. How do we give expression to that which cannot be seen, which also connects to the conference that we had last year in Belgrade.
It's also interesting to see that we use different words for the same thing. So sometimes we think we don't understand each other when we're talking about the same. So this is also important of what words we use when we describe our communities.
Yes, yes, very much so. Yes, we have here heritage professionals, conservators, preservationists, which all connect to our professional community and what supports our houses. And then there's the whole group of people who are connecting to schools, to teachers, volunteers, staff, research, students. So I think it's going to be interesting when we come back to this and do this again on the third day to see how things change. So I'm just going to take a quick screen grab of this so we can keep track of it. And I think that after 3 hours of sitting over here.
Ximena's got a question.
Oh, Jimena, please.
I wanted to. Thank you. I wanted to comment on something I found really interesting, like at least here in Mexico and maybe in Latin America. When we talk about museum community, we do not talk about visitors because we consider the museum community as the people that relates in a regular basis with the museum. So for us, at least, well, in the Frida Kahlo Museum, our 90% of our visitors, and we have made, of course, audience research. I do them actually. those research. Every year we do that research, and 90% of our visitors are one-time visitors. So visitors are not community for us in that sense, whereas museum neighbors, volunteers, staff, all those people, they are connecting with the museum in a regular basis. So that is why we call it community. So I found really interesting it's a different concept. And so that is I wanted to say. Sorry. And in terms of social network, because some followers of our museums are all the time following the museums and are participating in the online activities, and they are the same followers. So those ones are also community. And I love the fact that digitally the museum community is bigger now because of the social networking. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jimena. Are there any other comments? I can't see everybody, so I'm okay. All right. So, Jimena, I think that's a really important point that you made, to differentiate between the visitor who's just one time versus the people who actually live around the house or museum and use it as a regular source. I'm going to say thank you to everyone who has taken part today, for everyone who has presented and taken part in discussions and been with us over these past nearly 3 hours. We will see you tomorrow at 4 p.m. Paris time, when we go into our second word, into interpret, and we will have more papers, more video tours, and also a treasure hunt. So that's what awaits you tomorrow. Thank you, everybody, for connecting with us today.
Thank you. Bye.
And thank you to Caroline and to Cecilia and to Nicoletta behind the scenes who have kept it running.
Put your mics on to hear.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. See you all tomorrow.